program is brought to you by Newsworks in cooperation with the Eau Claire Area School Board. This program is simulcast on WRFP-LP 101.9 FM.
Good evening. I would like to call to order to our session for tonight. Those who are able, please stand. A pledge of allegiance will be offered.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Are we in compliance with the open meeting law notifications?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Let's proceed with a verification of quorum.
Commissioner Luganville, Commissioner Torres,
Here.
Commissioner Vu,
Here.
Commissioner Nordin,
Here.
Commissioner Vika,
Here.
Commissioner Harder,
Here.
Commissioner Klinkhammer.
Here.
Thank you very much. At this point, we're going to open the floor for public forum. Each person who has signed up will have 4 minutes to address the board, providing that he or she has additional or new information that has not been previously shared at the meeting. We will not hear personal complaints of school personnel nor any person connected with the school system in a public forum. The first person who signed up for tonight is Dan Wilson. As you come forward, please say your name and state your address.
Good evening, Dan Wilson, 3753 Patton Street, Eau Claire, 01. Just want to take tonight to thank the board for having the foresight to put together the OPEB committee with a variety of staff members with a variety of levels of experience. It was helpful to have newer employees along with those of us that have gray in our hair and have been here for a while to have on the board, have on that committee all at the same time. The makeup of all the employee groups and that variety of experience was very helpful in a lot of the discussions that we had. So first off, thank you for empowering us to be part of the conversation. And hopefully that is a model going forward that you guys would entertain to use for other decisions. I know it takes time, but speaking from the employees, we feel more valued, that we have a little bit of more skin in the game. Not that we get to make the decisions, but at least that we get to come up with ideas and understand your ideas better and kind of vet those around and share those. So again, thank you for letting us be part of that. Now, the outcome of that, Ms. Johnson later will be presenting the report and have our ideas that we've come up with, the rankings of those and how that goes through. I just wanted to say that the 9 ideas that we have on there, none of them really come with a huge red flag from the employee's standpoint point of view. It was really kind of, if you look at the rankings of all the people, the rankings kind of are all over the place. There's a few that stood out as very positive and some of the other ones that were flip and flop a little bit. So what I want to say with that is the one possibility that was not on there, and I didn't think of it until I was thinking about what I was going to say tonight, is from that committee, overwhelmingly it came out, and in some of the minutes it's been there and in some of the things it's been there. The number one option, I think, is the do nothing option. And that's not one of those 9, but I think that's one that's loud and clear from the employee standpoint, because the unfunded liability that we talk about with OPEB and retirement is a huge number, but it has dropped by millions of dollars over the last few years as well. So it's a problem that has a sunset. It's a problem that we've made changes to fix in the past. It's a problem that will go away. Maybe not as fast as we all hope, but it is going away and it is lessening and lessening and lessening. So I think that number one option that needs to be considered is to do nothing. If that's not the choice, then we have these other options for you to look at, okay? So one last thought before I go and sit down is, just remember that every dollar the district will save by making changes to OPEB that dollar directly comes from the employees. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next person is Aaron Sturgis. Thank you very much. The next person is Megan Holman.
Good evening. My name is Megan Holman and I live at 1727 Westmead Street. Yesterday morning, I sent all of you an email regarding the proposed boundary changes on the north side. I didn't think I'd be able to be here today in person. However, due to the generosity of my in-laws being able to watch our younger children, I'm here with my husband and our eldest daughter. I would like to reiterate what I stated in my email. The Eau Claire School District is in the business of educating children. However nice these numbers may look on paper, they are children and not pieces on a chessboard. It is the district's job to educate the whole child, academic, social, and emotional. Moving children to a different school unnecessarily causes great strain on their social, emotional, and academic welfare. You can take Princeton Valley, for instance, who is in Northwoods School, not my school. However, they are being moved to Locust Lane in order to bring their numbers up. Their numbers at Northwoods sit at around 20 kids in a classroom, which is ideal. And yet, to solve a problem of undercapacity at a school, you are taking these children out of an environment in which they are thriving and moving them elsewhere, where there will be ill effects. A few years ago, the board set a precedent when it made a decision about the North and Memorial boundaries. The board voted, 1, to allow current students to be grandfathered in and to finish their education at Memorial where they started, and 2, to allow siblings to attend Memorial that would begin before that sibling graduated. I urge you to do the same in this circumstance. What is good for Memorial families is good for all families. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next person is Emma Holman.
Hello, my name is Emma Holman. I live at 1727 Westmead Street. I'm going into 5th grade at Roosevelt Elementary, and I feel that it is unacceptable that one school in the district does not have a secure entrance. That school is Roosevelt. For how much safety the secure entrance provides, it would only cost $185,000. Kids should feel comfortable at school, not worrying about some break-in and how easy it would be to sneak past the office. Not every school has the same things, such as space, number of students, etc. But one thing that they should all have is top-notch safety and security. Would you please put this issue on your agenda to discuss it at a future meeting? I would like to see a secure entrance at Roosevelt before I move on to DeLong. Why risk the safety of 350 kids and adults? Thank you for your time.
Thank you for being so straightforward. That's all for our open forum. Thank you very much. The next point in the agenda is the superintendent's report. Dr. Hardebeck.
Thank you. So the first thing we're going to do is to review the upcoming school board events. On July 30th at 12 p.m. at Woodley, the Eau Claire Public Schools Foundation Summer Board Meeting will take place. On August 5th at 7 p.m. the school board meeting will take place, and that will happen here at the administration building. On August 15th at 4:30 p.m. at the administration building, we will be meeting the Transit Facilities Planning Committee. On August 19th at 7 p.m. at the administration building, the school board meeting. On August 20th at 4:30 p.m. at the administration building, Eau Claire Virtual School Governance Meeting will take place. On August 26th, all staff return to work. And at 12 p.m. each building will welcome back the ones activities by each building. And on August 27th at 1 p.m. in the administration building, budget vote. I have an announcement at the conclusion of the employment report, and I will ask to be recognized again at that time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hardebeck. The next point is the board president's report. First of all, I would like to, it's just 2 points. The first one, share that as of our next section in August, we will start thinking about our comprehensive development plan, which will lead our development process for the next 10 years. We will get started with the superintendent search. So that's coming next. That promises to be very exciting. The second one, I would like to thank the donation that we will be receiving later on tonight. But I would like to recognize Connie and Pat Ulrich, former educators from the Eau Claire community. It is thanks to her desires that an important contribution to enhance the facilities, the sports facilities at Memorial High School will be possible, and that is really wonderful. That's a really wonderful event for us tonight. That's all I have to report. Our next point in the agenda is school board committee reports. Budget.
Yes, budget did meet last week, and we discussed, well, we discussed OPEB, which is on the agenda for tonight, and we also discussed, we started the meeting with a discussion of the importance of establishing some philosophical perspective from the full board on the question of how to deal with our fund balance situation. And we may even get into that again tonight, but that's there was a lively discussion on that in the meeting.
Thank you very much. Legal committee.
No update from me.
Thank you. Policy and governance did not meet in the month of July, so there's no report. Is there other committee report? If not, thank you very much. We'll move on to a legislative update. Do we have any?
Sure. Since the last meeting of the board, the state legislature passed the 2019 to 21 biennium budget. Governor Evers signed that budget with several partial vetoes, many of which added to funding for K-12 public schools. The new budget and the partial vetoes increased school funding in several categories, including an increase in general funding, per pupil aid, and the percentage of special education reimbursement to 26% in the 1920 year and 30% in the 2021 year. The positive impact to the Eau Claire Area School District, according to the nonpartisan analysis of the Legislative Fiscal Bureau, is estimated at just over $3 million for 1920 and just over $6 million in the 2021 year. That said, there are still several areas for improvement, most notably special education funding, where the increase to 30% reimbursement is not close to the 90% reimbursement afforded to voucher schools. So that would be an area to continue to advocate. We have some wonderful advocates that are doing work for us, but I would ask that everybody continue to work with your legislative representatives to advocate for our public schools.
Thank you very much, Dr. Norden. We're going to move now to the consent resolution agenda. The board will consider approval of the consent resolution agenda items. 6.2 minutes of June 3rd, 2019. 6.3 financial report, May 2019. Budget 6.4 budget adjustments, June 30th, 2019. 6.5 gifts in the amount of $22,446.48 for the period of May 1st, 2019 through May 31st, 2019. 6.6 gifts in the amount of $82,292.78 for the period of June 1st, 2019 through June 30th, 2019. Payment of all bills in the amount of $5,269,796.87, and net payroll in the amount of $3,560,900 $511.94 for the period of May 1st, 2019 through May 31st, 2019. Payment of all bills in the amount of $8,695,112.76, and net payroll in the amount of $3,746,983.74 for the period of June 1st, 2019 through June 30th, 2019. Human Resources Employment Report. Approval of curriculum standards, 6.10. Approval of curriculum standards. 6.11. Approved modified 2019-2020 school calendar incorporating inclement weather makeup dates. 6.12, 2019-20 property liability and workers' compensation insurance renewal. 6.13, culinary equipment bids. 6.14, adopt new policy 513, job description and labor market review. 6.15, resolution authorizing the adoption of Wisconsin OPEB Trust Investment Advisory Agreement and appointment of investment manager. And finally, 6.16, resolution authorizing the adoption of the Wisconsin OPEB Trust and Custody Agreement and appointing the trustee and custodian. I need a motion to approve the consent resolution agenda. And a second?
Second.
Thank you very much. We'll do a roll call to vote.
Commissioner Torres,
Yes?
Commissioner Vu,
Abstain. Abstain due to resolution 615 and 16.
Commissioner Nordin,
Yes.
Commissioner Bika. Yes. Commissioner Harder,
Yes.
Commissioner Klinkhammer.
Yes.
The consent resolution has been approved. Thank you. Dr. Hardwick?
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to make a couple of introductions tonight. As you no doubt have seen in the newspaper and on TV stations, we have made an appointment to South Middle School. That appointment is going to Paul Uren. He is the former superintendent in Ladysmith, and he has already joined us and is working at South and is now on vacation. So when he returns from vacation at the August 3rd board meeting, we hope to formally introduce him to the board and to the community, and we're looking forward to that. And then my second introduction tonight is for Maida Miskey. As you know, our longtime superintendent's assistant and secretary of the school board retired, and that was Patty Iverson, and we said a fond farewell to her. And now we say a very glorious and happy welcome to Maida Miskey. She is a product of the Eau Claire schools. She went to Sam Davey, North Star, and North High School. She has gotten her associate's degree at CBTC and also her degree at UWEC, so she is Eau Claire all the way. She has been a secretary in one of the elementary schools, Mans. She has also been a longtime employee in the HR office, and now she is joining me, and she is our new mission control. So we welcome you, Maida, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hardwick. At this point, we will move on to individually considered resolutions. In the first place, we have a gift from the Ulrich Trust And Dr. Hardwick, will you do the introductions, please?
This trust, this donation is being made in honor of Connie and Pat Ulrich, who were sisters born and raised in Eau Claire. Pat was born in 1925 and graduated from Eau Claire High School in 1943. She received her education degree from UWEC in 1947, and she taught at a few different school districts across Wisconsin and in Minnesota. Pat later became a licensed librarian and received a master's degree from UW-La Crosse in audio and visual work. She was a longtime educator and a very well-known educator in Wisconsin. And her sister Connie was born in 1929 and graduated from Eau Claire High School in 1947. And she received her degree in physical education from UW-La Crosse in 1951. Connie later taught at Memorial High School for many years and coached gymnastics and track and field, and in addition she helped out in the performing arts, coaching drama. I think the sisters shared a love of Eau Claire. I think they shared a love of public schools. They certainly made the difference in thousands and thousands of students' lives. And we are so honored tonight to have with us Webb Hart, who is one of the trustees of the estate, and he is going to make the presentation to Dr. Torres.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hart.
Could you step up to the microphone so we could see you on the
Which one?
the little one with the red dot? That's it.
Can you hear me now? Move me away from my notes. You said some of the things that I wanted to say, but I think it's important that the board understand how dedicated these two women were to the Eau Claire area, and particularly to students in Eau Claire. As Dr. Hardwick said, my name is Webster Hart. I'm one of the trustees of the Connie and Pat Ulrich Trust. Dale Southard is the other trustee, and our purpose as trustees is to provide the funds that these two women left for this community to provide for educational benefit, assistance in any way they can to the young people, students, women athletes, people in the Eau Claire area that remember them as teachers and will remember them for their generosity. Neither of them had children of their own, but they nurtured and cared for hundreds and hundreds and thousands of children in this area. And when Pat passed away, she left her assets to Connie. Connie set up this trust with Dale and myself as trustees, and she told us what she wanted done. She wanted this money to be used for the benefit of the children and the young people in this community. So we have negotiated over some period of time an agreement with the school district. We want to provide $250,000 for improvements to the memorial track and field. The school had done previously work. I think the administration office had previously investigated this project, so we had some cost estimates and knew what it would cost for this to be done. And so the trustees agreed that we would provide up to $250,000. I have $50,000 of that right here for Dr. Torres. And in addition, we will provide up to $200,000 as the bids come in and we know exactly what it is. Dale Southard, the other trustee, will participate only to the extent that he'll keep an eye on what the bids are so that we as trustees will know when we reach the $200,000 level. We have agreed that the track will be called the Ulrich Track. There will be a photograph of Connie and Pat at two locations so that people that come and use it will know who these women were that provided this. In addition to that, the trust has agreed to provide $5,000 a year to the school district for maintenance of this track. We anticipate that the facility will last for approximately 20 years, so that will be an additional $100,000 that we will be providing, but on a $5,000 per year basis. So this way the school district is not really expending any of its monies for either the development of this track or for the maintenance on an annual basis. So I want to alert everyone here that the trust is not over. This is not the final gift that we have the ability to make. So if projects come to your attention, I'm sure Dr. Hardebeck will give me a call, or others of you can, that are things that would be needed for all of the schools, even though Connie was only at Memorial. She graduated from Eau Claire High School, probably this very building that we're sitting in today. So, Dr. Torres, here's your check. It's a little dated, but I've been told by my accountant that it's still perfectly good.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, nice to see you. I'd like to stay around for the other meeting, but it seems to me that it's a topic that might lead to a later evening than I can tolerate.
Before you go, we would also like to introduce Daryl Peterson, who is a counsel that has helped us to...
No, Daryl is an employee.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, we're going to let you go.
I don't get to meet Carolyn?
Well, no. I would like to say something. It is an honor for us to receive this donation in honor and memory of Connie and Pat Ulrich, and we'll make sure that it's used according to their will.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Take care. Good night. Good luck.
So we're having a little conversation up here because I made a little bit of a boo-boo in that I forgot during the employment report to announce that Daryl Peterson has accepted the position as an interim Director of Buildings and Grounds. So Daryl, would you stand up? Daryl has been a long time at Memorial in many capacities. He is very well respected throughout the Buildings and Grounds Department, has a wealth of experience, has almost been here 40 years, almost 40 years. We're very lucky to have Daryl be willing to kind of step in and help us out, and I can just tell you, through the snowstorms, the late spring snowstorms that we had, Daryl was in constant communication. So thank you. Thank you, Daryl. We're so glad that you're in this position.
And now, our next point in the agenda is consider demographic trends and facility planning committee recommendation on elementary boundaries.
Do you know if the, oh, it is. Thank you. So prepared. Good evening. Phil and I are here before you again tonight to provide the possible parameters surrounding the recommendation from the Demographic Trends and Facility Planning Committee. You'll recall that the committee has recommended smoothing the capacity at the elementary schools in the northern part of the district by retaining a two-section school at Roosevelt Elementary and then reestablishing elementary boundaries in the surrounding areas. And you can see what those boundary maps would look like there on the screen. The committee is also recommending that the next step would be to develop a facility plan to address capacity issues in overcrowded schools in the southern part of the district and at Prairie Ridge. And that plan is outlined on the left hand of the screen. At the board meeting in June, the board requested that the committee develop parameters for transitioning students in the impacted area, and that's really what we would like to focus on tonight, what those parameters would be and what that transition would look like. And Phil is going to walk us through the conversation that the committee had around those parameters and share with you some of the details.
Thanks, Kim. Good evening. The Demo Trend Committee reconvened on July 11th to develop the parameters that Kim was referencing. Based on the motions approved by the board for high school students back in June of 2017, and on the principles that the committee currently uses, we focused on these goals during our work. The first goal being to allow ample notice for families to transition. The second goal, keeping siblings together, a very important point for the committee. Third, follow existing practices when possible. And fourth, provide a definitive timeline for the duplication of transportation routes. As was requested, the committee mirrored its recommendations to those of the high school changes that were in 2017. So as we go through this transition plan, you're going to see on the left side the original high school resolution or motion, and on the right the committee's recommendations. And you'll see the first part of that recommendation here, which is simply that the committee recommends that the elementary school boundary changes take effect at the start of the 2020-2021 school year. During committee discussion, we looked at the recommendation through the lens of the students that were being impacted. The first group of students we discussed were elementary school students, and specifically those students who live in the areas on the map numbered 1 through 10. I know that's a little bit difficult to see, but 9 and 10 are right above Lakeshore, and I do appreciate it's a little bit difficult to see. The committee discussed at length which students would be grandfathered into their current schools, and we discussed how many students and grade levels would be impacted by the various plans, as well as the impact on transportation, school enrollments, and the transitions to middle school. After a very lengthy discussion, the committee recommended that we follow the process the district follows for alternative school requests, which allows fifth graders to remain at their elementary schools in order to avoid having those students transition to a new school in fifth grade and then to another new school in sixth grade. Based on that, the committee recommends that fifth graders from the 2020-21 school year may choose to remain at their current school until they transition to the middle school. It was very important to the committee that families remain together. In fact, our commitment was that under no circumstances would the committee or the district separate families. In order to keep families together, the committee recommends that we allow students in the impacted boundary areas with siblings in fifth grade to choose to remain at their current school for 1 year until the fifth grader moves to the middle school, keeping families together. The second group of students that we discussed were middle school students, specifically those students who live in areas on the map depicted here. The students in these areas currently attend an elementary school that serves one middle school. After the boundary changes, the elementary school assigned to that area will serve a different middle school. For example, the Star in the blue area that's currently assigned to Roosevelt and then DeLong. It will change to Sam Davey and then to North Star. The Star in the green area currently serves Longfellow and DeLong and will change to Northwoods and North Star. Committee felt it was important to have a plan to transition middle school students in these areas. The committee took the 2017 recommendation for the high school boundary changes and modeled our recommendation after that. As a result, our recommendation is that middle school students from the 2020-2021 school year may choose to remain at their current school until they transition to high school. And again, our emphasis was that under no circumstances would the committee recommendations require families to be split between any schools. With that goal in mind, as elementary students move to the middle school, if they will have concurrent enrollment with a sibling, the committee recommends that they be allowed to attend the same middle school as their siblings. So the recommended proposal states that we allow students in the impacted areas, in the impacted boundary area, to choose to attend the previous middle school if they have concurrent enrollment with a sibling. And the third lens that the committee examined was transportation, and specifically two parts of transportation. First, we wanted to be sure that transportation was not a barrier for families. Families that might want to grandfather their children into their current school. Second, we acknowledge that in our study, the community proposal involving flexible boundaries. Student Transit indicated that overlapping routes for a short time was feasible, but doing so in perpetuity would not be. And with that in mind, the committee recommends that transportation will be provided to students affected by boundary change for the outlined transition times in which students may choose to remain at their current school during the transition time. So in summary, there was one further recommendation that the high school boundary changes related to open enrollment. The elementary boundary changes do not impact open enrollment, so this brings us to the end of the parameters recommended by the committee. And the 6 parameters that we presented are summarized on this slide. So looking forward, with this plan, the committee will await the board's decisions on the elementary facilities recommendations. Once a decision is made, the committee would study 4K and the elementary expansion options to make a future recommendation to the board. Related to this, the committee will ask for direction from the board regarding parameters for the 4K decision. For example, because Roosevelt has remained a 2-section elementary school, there's been a discussion on the committee as to whether or not looking at Roosevelt to relieve 4K pressure is even an option. And then third, await appointment of board members to the committee. And with that, we would be happy to entertain any questions and discussion. Thanks.
Thank you very much for the report. Any questions from board members? Yes, Dr. Bika?
So I think one of the most important questions coming through from parents or other community members to us is that about students being able to remain in their current schools. Could you, I know you talked about lengthy discussions for that decision on the 5th grade, the 5th grade year, but could you please give more explanation as to why all children would not be able to remain? And then of course that affects the sibling piece, which is another big theme coming through in messages from folks.
Yeah. To some extent, you just answered that question. As when we prioritized the most important things to the committee, and I'm speaking for the committee, it was to keep families together. It was to keep siblings, their brothers and sisters together in the same school. And as those students transition through, it creates quite a lengthy transition. And one of the things that the committee really talked about was wanting to make this transition somewhat quick, because the more complicated it gets and the more exceptions that you make, the more that these unravel. Now, that's the committee's recommendations. And I mean, you're the board. We're turning this over to you. But for the committee, their priorities were that families stay together and let's get this done. Let's change the boundaries and let's keep families together, but for exceptions that were made outside of that family element, that we need to stick to the alternative school process and how they make decisions through that. Is there anything to add?
We talked through a couple of examples.
Yeah.
I think one of the questions we talked about, for example, with siblings is if I'm a fifth grader or if I'm heading into fifth grade, my family is going to stay, and I have a kindergarten or first grade sibling, 5 years down the road, that family could still be grandfathered in, and if there's a 2-year-old at home, that family then also becomes, that child also becomes grandfathered in. And so you really could be talking 10 years, 12 years to get a family through an elementary school. Families are connected to an elementary school for a long time. So my own personal example, I have 4 children. My daughter was out of high school before my last child was done with elementary school. So we had a fair number of years, I think 14 years, connected to the same elementary school. And it just has to do with how long you stay at a school, 6 years versus 3 at middle school.
So I think what you just articulated could be helpful to people to understand why it's not the same as the Memorial North boundaries, because people are connected to elementary schools much longer than they are typically connected to a high school. But I do wonder if there might be some possible compromise in there that might, just with allowing only fifth graders to remain, that if we might talk about some other compromises that would extend beyond just the fifth grade class and yet not tie the family because of siblings, you know, for a decade or 2 decades.
Was that a question, Dr. Bika?
Well, I mean, you can do that. I'm representing what the committee thought was best. And moving outside of what the committee talked about and kind of postulating on different scenarios was something we really tried to work at within the committee. A fifth grader moving twice within a year just didn't make sense. Splitting families just didn't make sense. And then as we started talking about examples and various things about, well, what if we allowed this? It created multiple kind of scenarios where it seemed to create, I think, some confusion in trying to communicate how this would occur. So then there's the alternative school process that allows for these individual requests to be brought forward, and instead of a blanket recommendation that all fourth graders are allowed to stay, there is a process in which that fourth grader could apply or request to stay. Correct.
I can speak to
Yeah.
that. We do have, there is an application within the district called an alternate school request. Families use that when they live in one attendance area within the district, but are interested in attending another school in the district. And most often, it is filled out when a family starts at a school and then moves to another attendance area. And the procedures within the district state that if a child is heading into 5th grade, we do allow them, it's called continuous enrollment, we allow the 5th grader and their siblings to stay in their previous school so that 5th grader can finish out their elementary schools and, or their elementary school years at that school. But students younger than 5th grade, if they move, we ask parents to transition them to their new neighborhood school, and that was one of the practices that we had talked about on the committee, that if this mirrored the alternate school request process within the district, it seemed to committee members to make sense to have it be the same. There is the one what if. So if I am I have 2 siblings or 2 children close in age. One of them is going to be a 5th grader, so they can stay that first year of transition. If there is a 4th grader following right behind, that 4th grader could fill out an alternate school request, and we would say, yes, you should stay. You should stay at your 5th grade school, because again, we wouldn't want that upcoming new 5th grader to switch in 5th grade and then switch again in 6th grade. So that's a standard practice across the district. All elementary schools use that rule.
And an idea that was actually generated by one of the committee members.
Commissioner Harder?
So obviously there's some contention about this topic, as we know. I think it would be helpful to just, as much as we can, to put a sort of a fine point on and just reiterate what is, from the committee's standpoint, is driving this change.
Sure.
Certainly there seems to be some opinion that it's unnecessary, it's too early perhaps, or more data is needed, or it's in the wrong direction, things of that nature. But my understanding, and you can correct me if you, because you've been in these meetings, so.
Yeah.
But my understanding is that it's really simply comes down to the crowding question, and that we know the impact that the crowding situation will have on academic achievement, and that's really the primary driver. Is that accurate, or is it too simplified?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. We have been at this 3 years. And there was a proposal to renovate Roosevelt. That was put on hold because Roosevelt is a 2-section school, and the committee has a commitment to build 3- and 4-section schools. That's in our principles. So the $20 million that was targeted, but not targeted, but articulated for that particular elementary school, started getting questioned by the committee because Locust Lane and Longfellow both were at 50% capacity. As a 2-section school at 90%, we started asking the question, can we not change the boundaries and not spend $20 million, but also bringing up the capacity at Longfellow and at Locust Lane? And then we started looking at a number of the elementary schools. There was odd boundary formulations. There were a couple of other elementary schools that were also, they weren't at 50-some%, but they were at 70, and they had some capacity ability as well. If you look at 2 of the elementaries that are on the south area, Mans and Meadowview, I believe, they're both pressing up against 100%. So there was a concern about at what point are we going to turn our attention and do something there, because that is a capacity issue that really deserves the committee attention. And then the committee went to, visited and held one of our meetings at Prairie Ridge. And the capacity and the Prairie Ridge is overcrowded as well. And I don't know the direction of where 4K is going to go. It changes, and it's kind of an evolving thing. But at some point, I think that we want to really study, which is one of our recommendations, 4K, and have a plan into the future about what we might want to do with that. And we're hoping for guidance from the board. So really where we started was instead of looking at school by school by school, which was the approach that the original Roosevelt recommendation was based on, we looked at the entire district in its entirety and all of the capacity numbers throughout the elementaries. When we looked at Roosevelt initially and said it needs some money for renovation, it absolutely does. As this young lady pointed out here, it needs a secure door. It needs several $1 million worth of renovation. That's something we acknowledged in one of the reports. But if we're going to build on a school, one of the committee principles is that we build a 3 and a 4 section school because it just economically makes good sense. So what we are doing is bringing forward a recommendation that Roosevelt stay a 2-section school. It still needs maintenance and it still needs quite a bit of renovation. But the 4K issues, the issues of some of the surrounding elementaries where the numbers are low, and that there's numbers in some of the southern schools that are very concerning to the committee, is why we made the recommendations that we did. That is about a 3-year journey in how I'm standing here tonight.
Okay, thank you. And just sort of as succinctly as possible, when we talk about and what is the target? What is the sort of optimal target of a 4%? Capacity?
Yeah, and I also the educational, the number of students in a classroom.
Yeah.
18 is the number I hear. 18 is an optimal number that's at a little higher level that with my background at higher ed. But 18, we had 90% as a target. We brought that down to 80. So 85 is now our target. It's not 90. And we have, I don't have my numbers here, but one's at 98%, 96%. We have an elementary right now currently at 96%.
And how, just sorry for my ignorance, but how tightly tied is class size and the overall school capacity? Are they necessarily directly bound together, or is there kind of a, because I could imagine that you might be overcrowded but still have plenty of staff for your ratios, to keep your ratios at a reasonable point.
Where you see this in some of the schools that are over capacity right now is there's not a physical space for another classroom. So one of the places we see that is at Roosevelt. That for the past several years, the kindergarten class could have used more than 2 teachers, like kind of a 2.5-ish sort of section, and we don't have a spot to put another. There's not physically a classroom available to create another class in that school. So what we have done for the past several years is called families and asked if they would be interested in attending another school. So that's one way that it impacts when we don't have physically the space. So if we go to the school that's at 96% capacity, there's not an empty classroom. So as an example, if we had enough students to have 4 sections of 2nd grade in that classroom, we may have the students, but we don't have the space. So then again, we're looking at
you may even have the teachers to to get the ratios in a reasonable place, but you're going to be crammed in one room perhaps. Or,
right. Yes, it becomes a facility issue. The other place that the committee looked back at feedback from Roosevelt staff in 2000. Do you remember what year it was? 2000. I don't remember. 12. I don't remember. I was going
to say 14.
Yeah, I can look back if you want it. But what the feedback from the staff said was when you have as many children as they have in the small building, they find it challenging. The FIAD teacher reported it's really challenging to play tag games in the facility, and tag games is, you know, part of the curriculum, and so there were some barriers to some of the things that staff could do. They noted that the cafeteria was very crowded, and I think the words were something like tripping over one another. Kids were tripping over one another to get to their spaces. So some of those common areas when you're a crowded school then also become crowded. So a common space like a cafeteria could be made to serve 100 students, and you might be trying to put 120 in there.
So the impact is similar to class size issues in terms of, we've heard about academic impacts to having this crowding. Maybe the reasons are slightly different, but similar kinds of impacts. And that's really, again, the driver for this, the hard driver for this. We know that there are concerns, very legitimate, understandable concerns about the impact of moving it emotionally and also academically. I think some of the numbers show, we've heard before, that the academic impact kind of washes itself out after a year or so. But we're left with the question of, you know, the softer impacts versus the academic benefit. And I feel like that kind of is the choice. Normally, I mean, I think under usual circumstances, we would take a committee recommendation and say, you know, knock it around a little bit and look at it and say, good, but here, there's been so much public interest and concern about this topic. And now it's come to the board here and I'm just trying to weigh up what are the fundamental questions here that we're looking at. And I think it's the academic impact of this overcrowding versus the other impacts we've heard about, the concerns about moving and those impacts. So yeah.
Academic impact and future facility needs. Where to put those.
Right. Yeah, simple space issues.
Yeah,
Yeah,
space
where will
issues.
this happen?
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other question? Commentary? I have a question. Had you been able to estimate how many less students are impacted with the modifications to the boundaries?
How many students will be impacted?
Less.
260.
How many less? Not
Right. So because if we take the 2019-20 school year, the fifth graders will not be impacted. This school year's fifth graders will not be impacted because they're staying there through their career. And this year's fourth graders will not be impacted because we would allow them to be grandfathered in. And then siblings of those students. So it should, 2 out of 6 graduating classes will not be impacted. So 66% will be, right, roughly? But of the 66%, if they have a sibling, there's a chance that they would be less impacted as well. So if it were 270, 2/3 of 270, would you like me to do the math? Okay.
Thank you.
Is that what it is, 220?
70%. Yeah, a little bit less than that. No. It's 80.
So if there are no other questions, we need a motion to approve the recommendation from the committee. I'm sorry?
What are we approving?
That. the summary is self-explanatory. Oh, sorry. Dr. Nordin?
I will move to approve the recommendations of the committee.
Thank you. There's a motion to approve the recommendation. I need a second.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Vu. We will vote, and we will do a roll call.
Commissioner Torres,
Yes?
Commissioner Vu,
Yes.
Commissioner Nordin,
Yes.
Commissioner Bika,
Yes.
Commissioner Harder,
Yes.
Commissioner Klinkhammer.
Yes.
The recommendation has been approved. Just one final commentary. For the committee next steps, I would request that you wait to begin any study of 4K and elementary expansion. That will be part of our discussions in the comprehensive development plan.
Gladly.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your support, Kim Kohler and Phil Lyons. Oh. Our next point in the agenda is we're going to adjourn to committee. We have a report from the Equity Committee for all night graduation parties. And that report will be presented by Kim Kohler and Carol Johnson.
Yes. Good evening again. Ms. Carol Johnson and I are before you tonight to share the results of the Equity Committee for the all-night graduation party. Carol is an Eau Claire Area School District resident and parent. She served as the committee of the chair of the committee and also has quite a bit of experience with all-night graduation parties. The Equity Committee focused on our partnerships with families in the community, which is directly aligned to the strategic plan. All-night graduation parties are 100% coordinated by volunteers, volunteer family members, and volunteer community members. So at this time, I'd like to introduce you to Carol, who's the chair of the committee and will be sharing with you the work of the committee and the action steps the committee hopes to take moving forward.
Hello, thank you for this time. In August of 2018, the board approved the creation of the Equity Review Committee for the purpose of identifying issues of equity, access, and consistency in the all-night after graduation parties that both schools put on. In the October 8th, 2018 meeting, these are the members who came to answer the call. We had parents, educators, administrators, board members, and also Sarah French from the Eau Claire Public School Foundation. Boom, yes. The all-night party is a long tradition. We've been holding them for around 36 years. As you can see, it was made for the intent to provide a safe environment for after graduation so that the kids would not graduate and then go drinking and then not get to experience what life had to offer. So our focus now, after developing 36 years, our focus now is to remove the barriers for our graduates. We have these great parties, but it's not being attended 100% or even 90%, so we want to increase that by decreasing the barriers that are in front of our students. This is The parties at a glance, of course, you should attend both parties. I encourage you to stay up all night with us. And you could even volunteer. I know that we both need volunteers. Tim, this year, you're mine. Memorial has their parties at the school. North High School has taken them off-site to Action City. Please read the information. I feel silly reading all of them to you. They're very different, but the same by providing an alternative to drinking and getting to drinking. That's just to partying. Right? Is that excellent.
Give me time to read it.
So there were many different barriers that we have found that our students are stating for not attending the parties. One of them is cost of admission. Another is language barriers, the process for which you can request admission assistance and transportation to and from the event. We met 3 or 4 times to talk about these different barriers that we had and how we can affect and reduce them. We also identified, donations, restrictions, yes. Apart from the obvious ones, there's also how do we get people to donate, how do we pay for it, how do we get the volunteers, and how do we actually source who we're going to ask for donations. One of the biggest volunteers is the fact that we are an all-night party. Therefore, parents will have to wake up at 6, do their long day, help us at night, and then go to work the next morning at 6. It makes it very difficult to say, come on and spend 7 hours with me. I promise it'll be worth it. So after discussing what we wanted to focus on, we came up with three ways that we can reduce, no, I've lost myself. One of the ways that we can reduce access and cost to the parties is to allow for an electronic access to the scholarship, so you don't actually have to physically go and talk to your counselor at school. You can just apply for it through a website, and therefore it takes out the need to say that I need something from you. It allows everybody to be treated the same. Also, another barrier to our parties is that if we want to make sure that everybody is included, we need to be able to give assistance, modified diet, and to do that we'd have to pay for.
There could be like students that might need staff members.
Right, what do we call the staff members?
An aid.
An aid, thank you. A special education, we'd have to pay for them to come. Right now, we don't have that budgeted into our budgets. And then we thought that by telling the story about why it's important to send and to attend the party, that we would be able to increase the amount of students and volunteers that are wanting to participate in the party. The biggest reason for the meeting was that there was a disjointed discussion between North and Memorial. What does Memorial do? What does North do? Are we doing the same thing? By having met together with the board and with the foundation, we were able to get best practices and see that we are together on most things. The biggest thing that we are different on is how we split up our donations. In the past, it was agreed that the school with the most students would get the most money. They're the ones that are providing for the most students. However, the point of the party is to get all the students there. And the barriers is that it's too expensive, we can't get the students transported there, and we don't have enough volunteers, which is the separate thing. What we decided as a group is that if we could give the school with the highest amount of free and reduced more money to be able to offset those costs, we would be able to increase the amount of students that are able to go. So we came up with a formula that would very intricately count different amount of people, and then the Eau Claire Foundation, once we start getting money, will make the first check to that first school, be it Memorial or North. It will change while we do different things. Nobody's ever on top for all. So they would get the first check to start being able to bring the cost down. And then after that, any money is brought in will be divided up between who has the most students. So whichever school has the most students will receive the larger portion of the donations at that time. Any monies left over that will not use to provide the party that year will be used for next year's to bring down ticket price. It is the intention of both schools to get to a zero cost for the student party. We're trying to source it so that from this point on, it won't be next year, but from this, we're going to start making it so that the cost to go to the party is not what is the barrier to going to the party. And then we can start picking off the other barriers from there. So then, what we have agreed to with the meeting is that meeting together is a good thing. We would like to continue meeting yearly, at least once, hopefully twice, once at the beginning of the year, once at the end of the year, to talk about best practices, talk about how we're going to fundraise together, and to make each other stronger, because it is one district. We are servicing one student, one population, and that's what we want them to remember. So and then there's also, yes, a final motion. Yes, that's what I just said. Yes, any questions? It was a really good meeting, we had good talks. Do I open it for questions?
Yes.
I now open it for questions. Good.
Floor is open for questions.
Yes.
I do have a question and maybe a comment.
Excellent.
So it seems equity and barriers seem to be the theme. And the one or two things that stick out quite a bit, but then it wasn't addressed, and that is, you have Memorial, who has a tradition of having the party right at Memorial. When Memorial started this party, that was the Memorial second party.
Wow.
35 years ago.
Brand new.
And I question what motivated this party to occur. It was so well organized, so much fun and energy came from the parent to make it work. And then you have this picture where Action City was for North. The difference between Action City and Memorial, the question is, why are the places different? Is it by default? Or is it by choice? Or is it by design? And my guess is there are more parents at Memorial who were willing at all grade level want to volunteer. At North, you have a demographic that parents are either the value aren't there or not economically are not capable of contributing to their kids' experience. So in my opinion, the study hasn't really addressed the barrier issue here.
Agreed, agreed. I know that my understanding of the meetings was so that we could have a standard or systemized way of fundraising and splitting the money. I agree that there are big differences. Will you talk to why they're separate?
So I think that the committee members went into the sessions with some assumptions about why is it at Action City versus why is it at Memorial. And one of the assumptions was, well, it's easy for Memorial to get volunteers and parents to work, and And that's more difficult at North, and that actually wasn't the history at all when we dug into it. Actually, what happened was there was a party at North High School, and some damage occurred to the building that was quite costly. And so in order to prevent that situation again, they moved the party off-site. So I think our assumptions heading into it, once we dug into the history of the parties and where they were, our assumptions were not accurate. And when we learned that it was a deliberate choice from North parents to move it to a site off campus based on an experience, I think that the conversations around, is it difficult to get volunteers or that sort of thing. Does Memorial have more volunteers than North High School? Yes, because North has all of the Action City workers that stay there the whole night. So there's less need for volunteers at Action City and more need for volunteers at Memorial. So we had quite a bit of discussion around, is one better than the other? Should they be the same? And really, I think where the committee landed, and correct me if I'm wrong, Caro, is the intent for this is a safe option for students. That is the what. We want a safe option for our children after they graduate, and how each school does that is, parents are in the driver's seat. The committee that plans it is in the driver's seat, and they would make that work.
And I would guesstimate that a North student that has gone through Action City would say it was the best time ever. I mean, I've seen the prizes, I've seen what they do to put together for the party, and it is fantastic. I'm a little jealous, but that's okay. I've got Memorial. Memorial's mine. It's all good.
Any other question? We will encourage you to continue meeting
Thank you. We will. It was
to
a very good experience.
find better ways to serve students and their families.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Yes, thank you.
Cole and Kim.
Yay.
Our next point in the reports is an update on OPEB committee. And this report is presented by Abby Johnson.
All right, good evening, everyone. And kind of like Commissioner Harder mentioned earlier, we worked with Budget Development last week on the presentation, and so we are excited to share results from the committee and what Budget Development has asked us to do, and has some questions for you tonight as well. So the first part of the presentation that we wanted to remind the board about was the operating fund balance. And so you can see that over the course of the last 5 years, our deficits have impacted our fund balance, ranging, in 2013-14, our percent of fund balance to our operating expenses were 25.6%. And with the adopted budget from 18-19, that $3.2 million deficit is projected to bring us to a 16.6% at the end of 18-19. We're still in the early stages of finishing out the 18-19 year, and so it's too early for me to predict with a lot of accuracy where are we going to land yet. But we'll have that information, and we'll share it with the board as we get it and get through the audit in the month of August. So one of the things that Budget Development has been talking about a lot is what are ways that we can impact that fund balance, and what do we need to do to help start bringing that up? If you remember that we've shared with you that the auditor recommendation is to have our fund balance be between 20 and 33% of our Fund 10 expenditures. And clearly, if the deficit ends where we projected it to be, that will bring us to 16.6%. And we've been talking about that a lot this last year, and what does that look like? And so when we start building the budget and working on things, Budget Development asked us to talk with the board a little bit about fund balance and, what is the Budget Development Committee goal and parameters for fund balance. They also wanted us to ask for some feedback from the entire board of what does that look like. So Budget Development had talked about setting a target amount for that fund balance to be at the end of 1920 and then going forward, or is there a threshold that the board is comfortable with? And so we definitely want to have that discussion, and I don't know if you want to have the discussion now or if you want to wait till the end of the presentation, but you want to have it now? Or
I can just say briefly that, as I said a few minutes ago, from my perspective as chair of the Budget Committee, this is the fundamental driving question for us as a board to consider is what are we trying to do? If you can go back, Abby, just one. We see this rather alarming drop-off over the course of 5 years out of a fairly safe zone in terms of what a normal fund balance would be expected to look like compared to spending. Almost a 10% drop over the course of 5 years, and if that trend continues, which it certainly shows signs of potentially doing, we could be in real trouble if you extend out 2, 3, 5 years. So the question is, I think, as we look at the 2019-20 budget year and the 2020-21 budget year, to the degree we have the ability to affect those things, what are we aiming for in terms of, do we want to try and hit 16.6% again? I mean, it's better than going down, right? That would be a 0% drop. Or would we want to say we want to not drop more than 1%? And I think, as we talked about too, Abby, we'd rely a lot on your team for some thoughts on what is even possible. And I know it's a lot of crystal ball work, and not all of it can be confirmed, but what's possible? And as we look at both in a short-term planning kind of sense, what do we want to try and do in the next 1 to 2 years? Also in the longer term, where do we want to try and get ourselves in a five-year and beyond time frame? So I do think this is, when we look at OPEB, this is the thing that's driving that OPEB conversation for me, is this alarming trend. OPEB is not going to solve this alone. It's a big, we talk about different levers we can use to help adjust this and address this situation. OPEB's a big one, but it's not going to be enough. And and the size of that lever is part of what we've been discussing when we talk about options A, B, and C. It's how much of that burden of this trouble are we going to shift onto the staff is essentially what it comes down to when we talk about these OPEB plans and the differences between them. So I wanted to just mention that framing as we go into this, because I think it potentially opens up the OPEB question to a bigger picture question of, gee, what are we trying to target and what tools are we going to use to get there? And that's how we've really started talking about it in budget development.
Thank you, Commissioner Harder. One of the things that we've also been talking about at budget development is related to that. We know OPEB isn't going to be the only thing on the list, I guess you could say, as items to be reviewed and evaluated. And so the list that I have on the screen right now is not anything new. This has been talked about at several board meetings. We've talked about it at budget development. And I think some of our conversations over the last few months with budget development have talked about the reductions. If there's going to be some, we need to look at that 80% of our budget, because that will really impact the bottom line. It's not popular. Nobody wants to make those decisions, but because it is 80% of our budget, we've already done almost everything we can do in that 20%. When you think about delaying equipment needs and kind of refining and looking at what are those needs that we can control versus this 80%, which is all impacting on the employee side. And so many of these things on this list were also part of the committee charge for the OPEB committee meeting. And so I wanted to remind the board and thank the committee as well. We had 19 members, and again, as spoken about by Mr. Wilson during public comment, variety of positions and different demographics brought to the table, and that was very helpful, I think, for all of our committees, or all of our meetings. We did meet 6 times between April and June, and the last meeting that we had in June was to discuss and rank items that were brought forward from the committee to the Budget Development Committee. And so tonight we wanted to kind of go through those and share their thoughts. Before we get into the detail, I just wanted to remind the board what the charge to the committee was, and it was to review, study, and discuss OPEB options, including stipends, health and dental insurance rates and plans, married couple benefits, and coverage for single-family employee plus plans. The ad hoc OPEB committee shall meet on an as-needed basis and provide a report to the full board by June 3rd with recommendations for board approval. So that's what my goal is tonight, is to present the committee recommendations and things that were talked about. So the items discussed were married couple health insurance benefit. The committee recommendation is no change. The stipend benefit, the committee recommendation is no change. Retirement health and dental coverage options for retirees. We're going to look at that item in more depth with number 6. Previous OPEB scenarios that were presented to the board, the committee recommended no change. And the committee realizes that this is something that's being looked at, and I think we heard it again in public comment tonight, the number 1 thing on the list would be no changes. And so you can see I have a little star on there, no change, but at the bottom of the screen I said some of the following ranked items only apply if the board is going to consider making changes to the current OPEB system. I think the other thing I wanted to reflect on was during public comment about the value and the dollar amount of the liability, and that the appearance is that it's dropped millions and millions over the last several years. I wanted to address that just a little bit because you can see our yearly contribution has been growing each year. And the liability, there's been some changes to the Government Accounting Standards Board and the way that we have to report that liability. So on paper, it appears that we've actually made progress and that liability has changed significantly. But the reality is that there was changes in the way that has to be reported and the way the actuary has to calculate that. So it's very hard to take a report from 2012 and look at that liability and look at the same liability from today due to things that are beyond our control. So I just want that to be explained to the board, because unless you live and breathe the Government Accounting Standards Board, you're not going to know that that's what is part of the reason why that liability looks different. And then the committee did come up with some additional things that they would like to bring forward to the board. And so those are the items also that we'll be going through tonight with the board.
Abby, can I ask a question for
yes, please
before
do.
we get into those additional items? So I'm a member of the Budget Development Committee. I have seen this information at the meeting, and I realized I think I'm confused. So for what Dan, what you said during the public comment, I know it would help me. I don't know if it would help others. As you get ready to launch into these additional items, I'm feeling unsure about which ones the committee is endorsing. So with that theme of to do nothing, it would help me to get some clarification of these additional items, which of them are actually seen as acceptable by the committee. Do you know what I'm saying, Abby? Right, but from budget development, and that's why I'm asking this before we launch in, because I got really invested in all of these items, and I just want to make sure I understand. I thought that what we're about to see, those are all seen as acceptable to the committee. That is correct. Yeah, please. Yeah.
These no changes are other things that, as a committee, we looked at and said, we're not on board with changing these. That's why we're recommending no change.
Okay.
And I'm kind of speaking for the committee without permission to speak for the committee, but the 9 that you will see later are the ones
Okay, thanks. Yep. Thanks.
Okay, so I guess going back to the slide, these were ones that were particularly called out in the charge of the committee, and that's why we said no change, because they were specifically identified there. And the additional items, as Mr. Wilson just shared, yes, they were items that the committee could support. So I think if you'll remember back for the Budget Development Committee members, we had the list all put together. We had them AA, BB, CC, DD, so we could identify these were the items. And Budget Development Committee specifically asked for the committee to rank them in order of importance or order of how these could be implemented, and in addition, add an implementation date. And so that's what we're presenting as well tonight. Now, keep in mind that we used the median of all of the answers from the committee because the average didn't always necessarily make sense. And so the median was kind of what was that middle ground and what did it look like? And as we were talking through that, that made the most sense to us. It may not make sense to everybody, but I just wanted full disclosure. There were some questions about how did we get what we got, and that's what it was. Okay, so moving on into those 9 items that the committee discussed and is making some, I guess, recommendations on them. The first one relates to HRA contributions for active employees. And so the way that our current plan and timeline works is that in July of each fiscal year, there's a contribution to the health reimbursement account for an FTE, and that's for all employees that are active employees based upon the beginning of the fiscal year that are taking health insurance. And so what frequently happens is that between July and the beginning of school, we will have resignations. And so what the committee talked about is we are double paying that HRA. So we may pay twice for one FTE, that HRA contribution. In the big scheme of things, over the course of the last 5 years, we calculated it's cost the district about $36,000 when somebody resigns and we need to pay that HRA again. And so basically the committee said, oh, that makes sense. And so maybe we want to shift the date of that HRA contribution and not make it right in July and make it a little bit later. I can tell you the reason why it was originally deposited in July is because that's at the beginning of the new insurance year and an employee is exposed to that insurance liability. That was put into place back in, I believe, 2008 when we started having the HRA contribution. And so the feeling at that time was that if you're exposed to that liability, we need to make that contribution right away. I think we've all learned in reality that, yep, the exposure is there, but you might not see a bill from the provider until August or something like that. And so that was the discussion with the committee, and the committee recommendation implementation date, if the board were to move forward with that recommendation, would be July 1st of 2020, and that's next July. Again, this is just the committee recommendation. The board would have to decide what they wanted to do. And again, the committee recommendation was, what was the most common date recommended for implementation. And so for this one, it was July 1st of 2020. So item number 2 that the committee chose to review and bring forward to the full board is also related to the HRA contribution. And so currently, if an employee doesn't complete the wellness requirements required for health insurance, the employee themselves will pay more for that health insurance coverage. The funds that are collected by the district from that non-wellness compliance can only be used for a very small items that are allowed by the IRS. And so there's not much flexibility to use for those funds. When we made some changes and reviewed how the married couples get their HRA contribution, there was no incentive for them to earn their, or to complete the wellness steps. Because the district is paying 100% for their premiums. And so at that time, there was some conversation about we want our employees to complete the wellness steps because many times that will help us with our insurance utilization down the road. And so we wanted to encourage them to also participate in those wellness requirements. And so in the 2018 year, the employees, the married spouses that are employed by the district started earning their HRA. The district gives an automatic amount, and then if one person completes the wellness steps, then there's an additional amount put in their HRA, and if the second person completes their wellness steps, then the full HRA contribution is given. And so the committee discussed that, and they really like the idea of all employees earning their HRA contribution, because that way then it's one system and it's also additional incentive for everybody to do it. The bigger thing is that it would provide the district flexibility in how those funds are used, because we wouldn't be automatically spending that money, and it may give some additional dollars to our bottom line and help offset the deficit that could be used in a different area. So you can see an estimated total savings per year. It could be up to $2 million because that's about the value of HRA contributions that we're making. I would say realistically it's more like $50,000 because most of our employees are automatically completing their wellness requirements. And so if you look at the committee recommended implementation date, it's January 1st of 2020. And the reason that is because wellness requirements are completed in the calendar year prior to the start of the next fiscal year. So if this was something that the board chose to move forward and they wanted to, move it forward immediately, January or the calendar year of 2020 would be the year that employees would start earning their contribution, and that would have a fiscal impact July 1st of 2021. And that's, again, just to make sure that employees have enough time to complete the wellness steps. And then it runs opposite of our fiscal year to give us more time to, kind of dot the I's and cross the T's to make sure that we've got everybody in the right place. And I forgot to mention on the first one, we also shared the groups of employees that would be impacted and if they were active or if they would be retirees. And so in both number 1 and 2, they would impact active employees. So number 3 is also related to the HRA contribution, and that one is actually would be impactful to retirees. So currently our practice is that if you retire after July 1st of the current year, you will receive that automatic HRA contribution the following year. And so in our example, if I'm an employee and I retire on July 5th of 2018, I'm going to get an HRA contribution in July of 2019. Employee B retires January 5th of 2019, 6 months later, they're also going to get that contribution in July. And so what the committee discussed was, what if we just stopped that HRA contribution the first year out of retirement? And so we estimated that it would save about $150,000, and the committee recommended implementation would be July 1st of 2021. Again, the board would want to consider if that's too soon, is that enough time for employees or not, but that's where our committee landed on their recommendation. Item number 4 relates to grandfathering. And so in the scenarios that were presented to the board, A, B, C, and B1, there's a proposed 3 or 5-year grandfather. What that was, just as a reminder, is that employees who qualified for retirement by the fixed date, they feel that they need to go in 3 or 5 years because if they don't, their OPEB benefit will change. And if you remember those scenarios in A, B, and B1, it was if you're eligible to retire by that 3-year date or the 5-year date, then you get the same benefit today. If you don't retire by that date, then your benefit will move to the new proposed plan and scenario that was presented. And so this one was grandfather based upon meeting the eligibility and letting them continue to work. So for example, if the 3-year grandfather was June of 2024 and I meet eligibility at June of 2024, but I want to keep working, then you let me keep working because then I'm not feeling that I'm forced out to go. And so I know that we had talked about that, and I know we talked at budget development last week about kind of why that was taken off the table and early on in kind of that conversation. And just it has to do with we have so many employees and how do we track it all and what is that sunset date. And so I know, again, that needs to be a board decision, but that was what the committee talked about is, please don't force me out. If I meet the eligibility requirements by that date, please let me continue to work. And so you can see I have a question mark by the estimated total savings a year. And that's really because it would only be implemented if the board decides to make a change to the current OPEB benefits. And then the group that it would impact would be people that are planning for retirement. So active employees that are planning for retirement in the next potentially 3 to 5 years, as kind of based upon what was in the scenarios. Commissioner Harder?
So we know that with this, that if we were to make a change to OPEB but change the grandfathering that we'd been talking about to this, we know the cost would be higher and that the liability would linger for a kind of a unknown amount of time, whereas with the grandfathering plan it had a hard end date of 5 years and we could sort of predict. This is not so much about saving money. Unlike the rest of the ones in this list, most of these in this list are alternate money saving ideas. This is really just a preference that the committee expressed about if we're going to make a change, how they prefer to do the grandfathering. Yes.
I would agree with that statement. Okay, number 5 actually has a couple of slides, and we tried to make it, we broke it up into kind of buckets to help make it easier to understand. So the committee talked about locking insurance rates. Our current practice is to lock the health and dental insurance rate at the year after retirement instead of the year of retirement. So for example, if the employee retires in 1819 and they're taking health insurance, they get the next year's cap. So on this slide in particular, we looked at a table of how have the rates changed over the last 5 years. And so you can see if I'm a single employee and I retired in the 15-16 year, my cap actually goes to the 2016-17 year, or the $590. If the policy was that my cap was locked in when I retire, it would be $558 on the single plan. And so what we did is we laid out the difference for the last 5 years in each plan. And so you can see that each year health insurance has been creeping up, and by giving the cap the year after retirement, that is again impacting our liability that we're looking at. And so then we costed that out to look at if that employee received that plan and they retired at 55, what would the cost difference be for 10 years? And so we did just 2019-20 caps and 2015-16 just to get the difference over 5 years. And so you can see the cap for a single person from 2015-16 was $67,000 versus $82,000 in 1920. So each year it creeped up a little bit, but when you look at that 5-year difference, it was $15,000. The thing that was important to keep in mind as well is that for many of those years we had a guaranteed rate cap for health insurance of 5%. And so this would be very different if we had market trend and didn't have that cap in there. So the insurance cap, if we look at, again, just singling it down and what the committee recommendation was, so the 5-year difference for looking at 2015-16 to 2019-20, a single plan would cost us $15,000 more, $24,000, $28,000 in those different years. So the committee's, what their recommendation is to lock it in the year that they retire instead of giving that increased cap for the next year. And what we did is we looked at, again, taking that 5-year average, it would be about $146,000 savings over 5 years by locking in the cap. And the committee's recommendation was to implement that in July of 2021. So that way then, if the board were to make a decision, people would know that decision now in 1920, still be able to retire with that higher cap and then put it into effect a year and give people a little bit of time to plan. And again, the group that would be impacted there would be retirees. So number 6 that the committee chose to bring forward and to review really again still had to do with the caps. And so what happens currently is we might have an employee who's 55 years old and retires, and they retire with a family plan because they have a dependent who's age 24. And if you happen to have dependents that age, you will understand that they can remain on your health insurance until they're 26 years old. And so the way our current plan works is that when you retire, your cap is locked in for the number of years until you hit Medicare eligibility. We don't change that number based upon status changes. So if you go out with a family plan, you get a family plan for all of the years, even if you don't really need it for those number of years. So in the example that I brought forward to you, and the committee talked about, we have a 55-year-old who has a 24-year-old dependent. So 2 years into that 10-year gap to make Medicare eligibility, the dependent would actually fall off, and now they only need an employee plus spouse plan at that time, which is cost less money than a family plan does. So in today's world, without any changes, that retiree would get the family plan and that family contribution for all 10 years. In our proposed model coming forward from the committee, they would get a family plan for 2 years because that's when they really need it, and then it would switch to an employee plus plan for the remaining 8 years. And so basically, the committee, it's hard for us to estimate the savings because we currently aren't monitoring and estimating who's going out with a family plan and when could all of those things change. And so we talked about how do you do that from administratively, and how do you track that. And I think we've got a good idea. And so the committee recommended implementation date was really right in the middle of the 2020 and 2021 fiscal years. So that's why the date says January 1st, 2021, because that was the middle point. And so you could say that anybody that retires after January 1st of 2021 would move to this new model, or the board could choose to do it at the beginning of the fiscal year. But the committee was really dead center between those 2 fiscal years. And I think I want to remind you that the benefit for OPEB is really early retirement incentives. And so when we're thinking about that, again, the incentive is to let me retire maybe a little bit earlier than I wanted, but then provide that opportunity to have contributions towards their insurance plan until Medicare eligibility. If we wanted to give you an idea of what is the difference between our current model and the proposed model, I've got it on the screen. And so you can see under our current plan, that family plan, the benefit would be valued at $202,000. If we were to move to 2 years of a family plan and 8 years of an employee plus plan, that would be about $172,000. And so you can see it's a difference of about $30,000. So it's hard for me to predict how much money and how that would impact the liability. We would need to work with the actuary to do that. But definitely there is a cost savings to be able to provide what is needed. Number 7 and 8 we put on one slide because they're very similar, and we've talked about this already. And so originally when budget development was working with the actuaries, one of the very first things that was talked about was, well, what if we just put a cap on the maximum increase for health and dental insurance? What if we cap it at 3% and 5%, and then anything else above that, the employee would pay the additional share of that. And so I know you've seen my spreadsheets with the tiny little numbers, and so I spared you from putting that into this presentation tonight. But basically, if the board decided to say we're going to change OPEB and have a 3-year maximum increase, that will save us $2 million over 30 years. If the board would say we're going to go with a 5% maximum increase, that'll save us $425,000 over 30 years. I think everybody knows that when you allocate that over 30 years, that it's very minimal. And what the committee, budget development, didn't bring that forward because of the cost savings, and it wouldn't necessarily have much of a budget impact at all. And so that was one of the reasons why it was taken off the table. But the committee wanted to bring it back because that if a change needs to be made to OPEB, this is one that they are comfortable with. And so you can see that our estimated savings approximately be $14,000 if the rate was locked at 5%, and about $69,000 estimated savings if it was locked at 3%. The implementation date that the committee landed on was July 1st of 2024, and then again, the groups that would be impacted would be the retiree groups. And last but not least, number 9 that the committee asked us to bring forward, again, was in relation to the scenarios that were presented to the board, and it really has to do about grandfathering. So some of our committee members are age 48 or 49, and they've met the years of service requirement for OPEB, but they haven't met the age requirement. And so if the board was looking at our 3 or 5 year grandfather period, they wouldn't meet that. And so they would ask that if there is going to be a change to OPEB and you're looking at a grandfather period, could it be based upon meeting the years of service requirement and not both of the years of service and the age requirement? And so, again, estimated savings is unknown because, again, this is a recommendation only if there is changes to OPEB made by the school board. And again, that group would be the active employees that are planning for retirement. So I've given you a lot of information and a lot of things to think about. And so really we want to allow time for you to ask questions of myself, Budget Development Committee members, and discussion, and provide us some guidance on what you would like the next steps to be.
Thank you, Abby, for that report. Questions, commentaries?
I do have a comment.
Commissioner Harder?
Thank you. And thanks, Abby, for going through all that. So yeah, I mean, just in a broad sweep, it looks like maybe that last one is also not so much a money saver. It's another grandfathering that would almost certainly represent a higher cost than it not doing it, right? But most of the others represent some potential savings. A lot of them are sort of, it's guesswork, right? A little bit as to exactly how much it would save, with the exception of the cap, the 5% or 3% cap, which, as we saw, if you can bring that up, the 3% and 5% cap, so that, yeah, doesn't save a ton over the course of 30 years, as Abby mentioned. What it does do is it manages to lock in our predictability on that liability, is a fixed number, which was an important objective. It did not provide enough savings at the time. When we looked at it originally a couple of years ago, one thing I've considered from the perspective of the budget development is that in combination with some of these other ideas, it could provide at least a stopgap for us to be able to assess and look sort of wider and holistically at other options. And we may find there are not a lot of other options, but we're talking in budget development about something like the revenue committee that we would do within budget development to look for not necessarily sources of revenue, that's already being examined, but would instead be looking at, well, essentially ways to cut, ways to shift. And that's what these are. We are still shifting burden, monetary burden from the district onto the staff, but these are ways that the staff has worked to develop and say, well, yep, these are workable for us. So I think it represents a stopgap where we can potentially look at that over the course. We will have, if we include a 5% cap, for example, we will have solved that predictability problem. So we would have taken a concrete step forward. We'll start implementing these savings. We can assess how they're going and how our budget is doing over the course of the next year, and come up with other ideas besides OPEB. See what we can find. We may not find much, but we can at least look. So that's kind of my take on it right now. That's why I find this an interesting development, these proposals. But ultimately, of course, it's a board decision as to how we proceed.
Thank you, Commissioner Harder. I have a question for Budget Committee or for Abby. A timeline. When do we need to make these decisions?
We've proposed several timelines, in the past, and we have not hit them, I guess I would say. So I think any realistic timelines for any of these, I mean, there were some options presented from the committee recommendations, and really it's going to come from the board to have any significant impact if any changes are implemented for the bigger OPEB scenarios. Some of these could be implemented as soon as next year. However, that probably is not, will not be well received by our employees, because many people have been planning on that. And, even as they were thinking in 1819, am I going to retire? Am I going to keep working? Again, depending upon when the board makes a decision, it could impact some decisions and maybe having people regret that they didn't go in 1819 if you put something into effect for 2021.
Yes, I think some of that is built in though into the recommendation.
Yeah.
The recommended dates, right? Kind of take that into account as, what would feel fair and workable. So there is to some degree there is a timeline built in if we work from those dates. Yeah.
Okay, because my understanding is that this is something that the OPEB committee could live with, right?
Yes, the items that were presented tonight, the committee was very comfortable bringing them forward. There were plenty of other things that were discussed that were not brought forward, but these 9 in particular, the committee was comfortable with.
Great, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Hearing none, we'll receive the report and thank Abby for the good job, and all the committee as well. Thank you. Our next point in the agenda is the superintendent's interim progress report.
Good evening again. I'm going to take this opportunity to do something a little bit different tonight, and I'm taking this different approach because there are many, many times during the school year where you get reports about data and student progress and lots of charts and lots of numbers. And tonight I'm going to take all the numbers out of the presentation, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit more broadly about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what we hope to accomplish. I think that it might help us to begin to think about the aspects of our strategic plan rather than beginning with the goals as we usually do. We talk a lot about wanting to achieve academic achievements, student social emotional growth, collaborative cultures, high quality staff, partnerships with families and the communities. But I think sometimes we lose sight of why we're doing these things and why these parts of our strategic plan are so critical to the work that we are doing. And it really comes back to students. We have several principals in this district who talk about the only reason that we are here is for students. Students are the only people who have a right to be here. Everyone else, whether we're on the school board or in the superintendent's office or on the executive team or teaching or acting as support staff, we're all here as a privilege. And it is our privilege to help students to grow and to learn and to develop into the people that they can be. So in thinking about that, we talk about how can we do that. And the board's goals are all aspirational. They're kind of very broad goals in that we're educating the whole child using multiple measures, assessing academic achievement, social and emotional growth that are characteristic of successful adults. We're going to keep coming back to this theme. So in the first goal, our role in the school district and those of us who are in staff is to really promote the well-being of the whole child, to prepare those children and students for post-secondary success, to close our achievement gaps, to help our students be career ready, and to graduate recognizing the behaviors of successful adults. And hopefully, if we have been successful, more and more of our students will take on those characteristics of successful adults. I think of this first goal as our what goal. What is it that we are hoping to do? And when we talk about the what of this goal, we're talking about building on the diversity that we have in the district and seeing our diversity as a strength, relying on research and best practices to inform our decisions, and then as a staff, really focusing on the partnerships, working with each other, working with families, and working with the community to make our dreams come true for students. So why do we take this approach? Well, if you look around the room and you look at our core values and our mission statement and our vision statement, it's really about our commitment to our beliefs. So what are our beliefs? I mean, when we put our beliefs into action, and we look at those aspects of the school improvement plan, and we look at the aspects of the strategic plan, and we look at the goals that we all have, if we put those beliefs into action, we're showing commitment. And as I was thinking about the beliefs that we seem to share as a school district, I think we do share that belief that all students can learn and grow. I think that we when we talk about equity for students, I think we're voicing that old belief that John Dewey had about what the best and wisest parent wants for his children, we want for all of our children in the community. I think that when we talk about partnerships and when we talk about working in partnerships with families and with the community, we are really saying to ourselves that families are the first teachers, and we're going to help those families develop their children. And then when we talk about the community and we talk about working together and being collaborative, I think we're all saying that we're better together. Whether we're better together as a board and superintendent, whether we're better together as a staff, whether we're better together with the community, we can do more if we work together. And then finally, we talk a lot about research, and we talk a lot about basing our decisions on research and using best practices and spending time thinking about what's the best thing to do. And I go back to that old saying that Yogi Berra said, you can observe a lot by just watching. And I think we do that. I think we're watching each other. I think we're learning from each other. When something works, we're trying to figure out why it worked and how we can replicate it. I think we're looking at the latest research on how to move students forward, and sometimes that research has to do with social emotional development. Sometimes it has to do with tending to the physical needs of our students. And what's the best way to do that? What's the best role for the school district to play? And I think it has to do with how do we work with our community to get them to support the efforts of our school district. So when I think about all those things, at the end, what we're really doing is saying that when our students leave us, and they go on to higher education, or they go on to careers, or they go on to the military, or they go on to be entrepreneurs, whatever it is they decide to do, they know they have the toolkit to make that work, and they also have the characteristics of successful adults. And that's something that we have talked about. So when we're looking at this why piece, In the results we're hoping to be, if you look at these characteristics, these are the things that parents ask us to do for their students, to be able to go into a diverse workforce, to have cultural empathy and understanding for others, to have improved working relationships, to be able to address identified needs not only at work but in their community and in their families. These are things that successful adults are able to do. They're able to work and collaborate with each other, and they have a bigger perspective than their own. We talk a lot about having a global perspective. We know that that's important, but we also know that it begins locally. And we in Eau Claire are fortunate in that area. When we look at the second goal, I think of this as the how school board goal. How are we going to do this? With collaborative, intentional, engaging culture, using research-based practices to promote student learning. For our goals, it means to strengthen high performance and support to schools. So probably our most costly support to schools in the last several years has been through the referendum. We would not have been able to do that without the support of our staff and without the support of the community and without the outreach that we had. But the support to the schools also comes through all of the committees and training and professional development and services that are provided to the schools that come through the district. We talk a lot about ensuring equity in the district. And this is about access and making sure that all students have access to a rigorous curriculum and to all programs in the district. And I think the district has helped us in working through our various equity committees. You saw an example of that tonight in terms of getting people together to determine, are there any gaps in the way that we are providing those graduation parties? Are there any gaps in the way that we provide athletic opportunities or arts in the performing arts? We've had numbers of those committees come together to look at these issues, and then building that respectful, positive culture. All of our professional learning community work, all of the training that we've done, all of our PBIS, the schools that have taken on responsive classroom or restorative justice, all of those ethics within the schools are designed to help build that positive and respectful climate. The listening sessions that you had through the boundaries, the listening sessions that you're having now about OPEB, I think shows that the district has a respect. And part of our role is to facilitate those listening sessions for you and getting those people together so that you can hear their thoughts. Part of the what has to do with the guaranteed curriculum, the guaranteed and viable curriculum. We do this in a number of ways, making sure that our elementary students come out of elementary school with those foundational skills that are so essential to move them forward in the grades. We have just gone through a year's planning and revision of the elementary reading curriculum, and we have done that because our trend lines are not going in the right direction in terms of seeing growth and proficiency for all our students. Now, we have made some gains in closing the gap, and we're very hopeful about those gains and that we can sustain those gaps. But we also know that without a guaranteed and viable curriculum in the elementary foundational skills of math and reading, we're not going to be able to sustain those gains. So much of our effort has been in writing, in reading, and in math to make sure that our students are equipped. We have a number of district-wide curriculum teams who are looking at curriculum at all levels. We have a group that is working on science right now, and the idea of that science curriculum is to align the science curriculum with the next generation science standards, which will help to move our students not only forward in their study of science, but to help them to be current with current practices. We have a group that's working on our world language curriculum, and the idea of that is to strengthen the rigor of that curriculum so that students can take some type of national test, whether it's an advanced placement test or it's the National Foreign Language Test, which will help them to earn credit and be portable no matter where they go to school. So, or college. So right now, the system that we have kind of feeds them into the UW system, but sometimes that learning and that proficiency that they've gained at the high school is, while it may be there, is not always recognized or given credit in other higher education institutions. So those are a couple of the examples that we have about district-wide curriculum teams, but they're throughout the school district. We continue to work on our culturally responsive practices. We probably get more feedback about this on our staff surveys in terms of professional development, in that some people feel they have this mastered and other people are still struggling with it. So as we move forward with this initiative, we'll be doing some more type of what I guess you would call education camps for teachers and other staff so that they can go into areas. I think we've laid down the foundational skills in culturally responsive practices, but it's how we tweak them, how we use them when they're the most appropriate, and that depends on staff member by staff member. So we'll be looking for some more individualized approaches and more personalized approaches with these practices. We are in the process of a middle school program review, and of all of our levels, this is the one that is the most challenging. This is where we see the most challenges for students in terms of showing growth, in terms of showing proficiency, particularly in those foundational skills, that they come out of elementary school showing some progress, and then we kind of have a little dip. So we're looking to see what structures we can put in place to strengthen our universal curriculum, and also to strengthen the PLC model for middle school, and really looking at that model to see if we have the correct model in place for Eau Claire. And then at the high school, we've been looking at this multi-level system of support leadership team. I think one of the really big challenges that we have as a school district, on the one hand, we graduate more students than almost anybody in the state if it takes them 6 years to graduate. That 6-year graduation rate is well beyond the state, which shows that we stick with our kids, we don't give up on them, and we don't let them give up on themselves. But we want to see more and more of our students finish in 4 years, and more of our students have to have fewer and fewer interventions, because the universal curriculum is strong. When students start to get in trouble or they start to falter, we have opportunities to intervene early and before they have to seek out alternative forms of education. So that's a big push for us going forward. So we hope that by working with these particular things, we will be able to strengthen that guaranteed and viable curriculum, and it will be a universal curriculum that will be accessible to all and mastered by all. And then the why in terms of supporting teachers and students, we think that our results will be that we will have improved student performance, we'll begin to see the trend line move from one that's flat to one that starts to move upward again, particularly in those foundational skills. You know, it's an odd thing that we have so many high school students who are so successful in advanced placement or at CVTC or in their internships, but yet we're struggling to get them up to that high school level. We want to have wraparound support for our students. And that wraparound support is going to come in, it comes in many, many different ways, and sometimes I think it depends on the student in terms of the different ways that it comes. But for some students, it is those physical needs: shelter, food, clothing. For other students, it's mental health services. For other students, it's maybe someone, a trusted adult to talk to when things aren't going well at home or you need additional resources. For some, it's tutoring. It just depends on the student, and we're trying to provide all of those services. And then we're trying to assure access for all students. And part of that access comes from those foundational skills that are in elementary school. If students don't get those skills in elementary school, their choices begin to narrow because they are so involved in interventions and in trying to catch up. And sometimes they go away and they come back. We don't want that. If we can give them good foundational skills when they're in elementary school, and that doesn't mean that they can't have innovation and all of these other things, but we have to have that universal instruction. Otherwise, we limit the access and choices that our students will have as middle schoolers and as high school students, and eventually when they leave us. If we can promote this kind of atmosphere within our schools, we will maintain our safety and security. We will attend to adolescent mental health, which is a growing need within our district and within our country. And I want you to go back to those wraparound services that we talked about. We will continue to narrow and close those performance gaps, improve the number of students who are proficient, but not only that, the number of students who are growing beyond proficiency. And that's an area of growth for the school district. We will return open enrolled students to our school districts because we will be successful as a public school in providing those services to students. And we want to reduce referrals to alternative sites, which we think we can do if we can strengthen that universal curriculum and those wraparound services. And then we want to build our staff capacity. I talked a little bit about not being able to do this alone, that we're better in this together, but we know that the needs of our students are constantly changing, and we have to be a little bit nimble in the way that we meet those needs. And a lot of that comes with working together, but a lot of it comes through training too. And I think this opportunity that we're going to have to have the mental health first aid is certainly going to be a step in a different direction for us, because that's something that that idea of students having anxiety and fear and all of that, those are all mental health issues that we need to be able to deal with. And then finally, we want to see the attendance improve for all of our students. Sometimes we see that students have great attendance at the elementary and middle levels, and then it starts to decline. And so we want to make sure that we're offering engaging and relevant programs for students that will help them to see their pathway to post-secondary success. This one, sometimes I think, is more of the why school board goal. Why are we doing this? It's about creating the connections with the community to support our students, because just as our staff can't do it alone, we can't do it alone as a school district. we need support and help from our community. And so you've got your board and your superintendent, you've got your family, staff, and community, and that will equal student support. And so as we look at our community partnerships, I just encourage you to go on the website and look under partnerships. I think we have well over 150 partnerships, and these are substantial partnerships. These are partnerships that range from corporate partners like RCU and BMO and McDonough and, you know, corporations like that, to nonprofits like the Boys and Girls Club and Big Brothers Big Sisters and Girl Scouts, to the churches. I mean, it's just almost as if we've touched on every aspect of our community support, and we continue to build those partnerships. And those partnerships help us in some ways to provide those wraparound services for students, but they also help us to give like a value added that we might not be able to give ourselves. So I'm thinking about students who get scholarships to go to summer camp. That's something that we could not do, but our business partners or our community organizations help us to provide that access for students. Scholarships. You saw a great, I think, example tonight of a community partnership with the Ulrich Trust coming forward to meet a need. Those are all things that take time and effort and collaboration in order to work out, and we're starting to see more and more of that come forward. We have some unique programming that has been community driven, and we have two great examples this year with Spanish Immersion, which started with one of our most underserved groups, and the other was with Virtual School, which was also with an underserved group who had left us and now are returning to us because we've been able to meet their needs. But in addition to those kinds of programs, we have Project Lead the Way for our pre-engineering students. We have Project Search for our special education students as a career path for employability. We have lots and lots and lots of programs that provide unique opportunities. I mean, I think, you know, even about Montessori and McKinley, those are unique programming opportunities, although on a much larger scale than what I just talked about. We have numbers and numbers and numbers of committees that try to engage people in our work, whether it's the Healthy Living Committee, which was formerly known as the Wellness Committee, our equity committees, our OPEB committees, our boundary committees. All of these are an opportunity for us to get different viewpoints and to incorporate not only the voices of many people, but also their ideas, draw on their expertise, and find out about their needs and how we can better serve them. And then the board has instituted this procedure for listening sessions to help inform your decisions and to help get feedback. I think that's been a very, very positive move in terms of being able to get more and more people to the table to join in the work. And then finally, the grants that we've been able to get. And I think the two that come to mind this year that have been very, very important to us were the school safety grants, which allowed us to do some training. It allowed us to put in some equipment and some do some facility work that we had not been able to do before. And also with our mental health grant, that's going to take us in a different direction. And then we have other grants that are somewhat smaller in nature, such as the Anne Marie grants, which enable teachers to, and the grants that come from the Public School Foundation, which we can't forget, that help our staff to try things that they might normally not have been able to try without that funding. So why do we do these things? Well, it's really, again, coming back to that first thing, it's about our students and promoting their well-being and promoting their learning. But it's also about community ownership. Our schools belong to our community. We want them involved in our schools. We need their involvement in the schools. And I think one of the challenges going forward for the school district is going to be able to increase their footprint within the community. Sometimes we have a tendency to not promote ourselves as a school district and not reinforce our value to the community. And I think we have really been working on that with our communications committee, and also trying to show what's really special about our school. And we've been trying over the last year to do that in a very different way. So I think at the end of it, you know, if we are going to have kind of an all-in commitment from our community to continue to provide the support that we need, and to continue to join us in the work that we have, and also to be able to see the payoff of our work and to appreciate the payoff of our work with the great students that come to them and take their place in the community. And you see that daily in Eau Claire. We have to improve and increase our footprint in this community and show the value that we have to the community. And I think your goals are enabling us to kind of have the imprimatur to do that, but it takes us all, and that's what we're working for.
Thank you, Dr. Hardwick, for your preliminary report and for the helping us remember what the goals and how we achieve them with your work. I'll open the floor for questions or commentaries for Dr. Hardwick. Are we speechless?
My first reaction.
Commissioner Vu?
Yeah, I was going to say, perhaps in the future we want the superintendent's report to be early than any other report.
Well, then everything else then that we can show you after that, from the opening of schools report onward till the end of the school year, will be just like, okay, so this is what we've done, or these are our results. It's not so much about what we're doing, but these are the results. And tonight I really wanted to talk to you about what we were doing and why.
Well, we will have to thank you for the presentation and encourage you to keep moving forward.
Thank you.
I have a quick comment.
Yeah, Commissioner.
Yeah, I want to echo
Arthur.
that, and thanks for the presentation. And I do, I really appreciate the focus on concepts over numbers in this particular one. That was a nice shift, and I think it was timely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there are no more questions or commentaries, then the next point in the agenda is requests for future agenda items. If there are none at this yes, Commissioner Avica?
I'm not actually sure if this is a request for a future item or not, but when Mr. Hart presented the Ulrich donation, he spoke to some board values that we articulated earlier this year, and that is thinking about donations in the context of a comprehensive long-term strategic plan for athletics and facilities in all the schools. And so what I wanted to ask, or I guess suggest and see what you thought of it, would be to rely on the district's equity committee structure, that it may, I was so struck by, so that this is the first of possibly other gifts, and that they're thinking of the entire district, not just where the women served. And so is it time to convene an equity committee that would take a comprehensive look at athletics and facilities at all the schools? So thinking about, for the purpose of informing our capital plan or gifts, including the foundation, come back with recommendations for us right away in the next academic year. I don't actually know how to ask for that, so I just grabbed this opportunity, honestly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well taken. I think that belongs to our conversation about the comprehensive development plan, and certainly that will be the moment, which is coming soon. Thank you. The agenda committee will convene tomorrow morning at 8. Agenda setting. If there are no other questions or requests for future agenda items, then it is 9:39. Our meeting. No, I need a motion to. Again, I need a motion to adjourn.
I'll make the motion.
And a second.
Second?
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
This program was brought to you by a cooperation between Newsworks and the Eau Claire Area School Board. Newsworks is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, please contact us via phone at 715-839-5067 or online at valleymediaworks.org.